If you're looking to purchase a hand plane, particularly a bench plane, and you're not willing to spend, $250, $300 for a Veritas or Lee Nielsen, or maybe $150, $200 for a Wood River, one of the things to consider is an old Stanley plane. These can be purchased for as cheap as $20, $25 up to $100, maybe a little over $100, depending on who the seller is. So let's take a look and see what you're looking for when you purchase one of these, because there are definitely some features you want to avoid. There's features you want to look for, and knowing that will make you a much better buyer. You do have to realize that it's never going to work quite as nice as a new plane. There's just not the materials and tolerances there to be able to do that, but you can get pretty darn close. And know also that it's going to take some work, and I would say at a minimum 3 to 4 hours of work, depending on what needs to be done. It's possible you would have to replace the blade. That's not uncommon. That's going to cost $30, $35. So your outlay of funds might be more than just the plane, but still you're typically going to be spending much less than you would for a brand new premium plane. So let's take a look and see what you want to look for if you're searching for an old hand plane. Stanley's been making planes for a long time. The first of this type, where the body was all metal, was produced just after the Civil War, 1867. Prior to that, and there's probably some overlap, so possibly after that, the sole of the plane, the bottom 1.5 inches or so was wood, and then the top part was metal. But if you're looking for a good plane to use for hand tool woodworking, you want an all metal plane. So they started around 1867, and they've made them up to today. And early on, the features were getting better. They were making improvements. And then at some point, cost cutting started taking effect. People weren't using hand tools as much, and they started cutting back on things. So there's a sweet spot in there, and we're going to take a look and see what to look for and identify those particular features that make for a good plane. They started making the all metal planes in 1867. And the paperwork that we're going to be looking at, as far as the different types, ends in 1967. So we've got 100 years of plane making here. They distinguish between the planes by type number. So in 1867, there was a type 1, 1967, type 20. And of course, throughout that time, they made changes to the planes. Each one of these has distinct features relative to it. The peak, as far as I'm concerned, was type 11 and type 12. That's the ideal situation. That's what you're looking for. That was in 1910 to 1924. So there is the sweet spot. Now, planes around this period are still good, but if you can find a type 11 or type 12, you've done well. That's what I'm trying to find if I'm looking for an old plane. So let's take a look at the actual planes and see what distinguishes them. We're going to be using this flow chart to determine what type number we're dealing with here. So there's a series of questions that brings you down through here, and as you work your way through this, you'll be able to determine what type of plane you're working with and how old it is. So we'll take a look at several different planes and see some examples of various features. This is my number 5. And I know it to be a type 12. So I'm just going to start with this. We're not going in any particular order here. So looking at the flowchart here, the first question is how many patent dates are cast into the bed. And if I look at this particular plane, I'm looking down in this area, there are 3 dates there. So that narrows it down considerably. We come down to here, there's 3 patent dates. Is the depth adjuster not large? And the answer is yes. This is the large adjusting nut. The smaller one is almost a ½ inch smaller than that. So this is a Type 12. So really sweet plane. So what makes this plane special? Let's take it apart and take a look. So lever cap comes off, blade comes out, and we're going to take the frog out because that's where the good stuff is. So there we go. Okay, so there's the 3 patent dates. Now, first thing you want to notice is the interface of the frog. The frog sits here and here. So this surface and these 2 surfaces down here. The frog adjustment is via this screw, which interfaces with this tab here. So some planes don't have that tab, although that's not distinguished on the flowchart. Now, one of the things that makes this nice is this piece right here. This rib on either side here is machined, and that machining interfaces with this right here. Notice there's actually some pieces sticking out there, and then that's machined also. So that fits tightly on there, or pretty tightly. Later, and some of the earlier ones don't have that. So the frog is not guided well at the front of the interface there. At the back end, we've got this adjusting screw, and right, by turning that, I would move the frog back and forth. And the fact that the screw's even there is a good thing. Like I said, some of the planes don't have that screw. So this in particular, this feature is one of the things that's nice about the Type 11 and Type 12. The other distinguishing feature of these types is the chip breaker. So we can see the chip breaker if we take it off. So I'm going to loosen that screw, and then, oops, I shouldn't have done that. It's supposed to go forward and then back. There's not a lot of threads holding that on, so it's easy to take that off too far. So notice first that this is dark as opposed to, I'm hoping that shows up okay. And this isn't a functional thing, but that's just an indication that we're in this time period. They did something or didn't do something, didn't remove something on the back side here. So the fact that there's this dark patina here tells me this is a older plane. The other thing that is a distinguishing feature here is notice the chip breaker. It's the same thickness coming through here. And then starting at about here, it gradually tapers off to nothing. So it almost comes to a point there. Now, this isn't a big functional thing. It's just more of an elegance thing, and it tells you that they put some time into this. The later ones, this is the same thickness pretty much all the way to the tip, and then there's just a little bevel on the end. So it's just a more elegant design. Other than that, the chip breaker is the same. Now, this is an aftermarket blade. This is not the original blade. It's a Hawk blade. Some other things that are nice about this plane, and these are not necessarily distinguishing from planes that aren't as desirable, but It's got a rosewood knob and handle here. So original rosewood, they did this for quite a while, but later on they switched to different woods here, and eventually they switched to plastic. And one nice thing about this particular one is the handle's not cracked at all. It's pretty common for the handle, either this horn to be broken off or there to be a crack somewhere in here. The rest of this is, there's not really much distinguishing it from other planes. The lever cap has no distinguishing marks on it. Some of them actually, there was cast in here, it said Stanley. Later on they were plated. Usually if something's plated or painted, that's usually a bad sign. That means they're trying to hide something, although not always. This has the keyhole type opening here. We'll see on some other ones it looks more like a comma. Once again, that's not a big deal, but it is a distinguishing feature. So that's it for the lever cap. And on the frog, the frogs all pretty much look the same. Much later, this Y adjusting lever was not cast. You know, this is a piece of cast iron, nicely done, you know, nice fine surfaces here. At some point, much later, this was actually stamped steel. It was two pieces that were bent and put in there. Another thing that happened much later, this lateral adjusting lever became one piece instead of the main lever here, and then a handle part that is kind of peened in place and a washer that's held on there. It was all one piece, and this piece was just bent down. This was just bent up. And once again, those are much later planes. You're not typically going to see those if you're looking at old Stanleys. So that's kind of it for the frog. Notice too this black paint that's on here, and it's a little beat up on this one. That's more, of course, cosmetic, but this is called Japanning. It's not regular paint. It's baked on. You know, the more that's there and the more intact it is, the better. But once again, it's non-functional. That's just an aesthetic thing. Here's a number 7, and of course, you know, we can always tell what plane it is by looking at the number at the back. And if you know your planes, you know, I know this is a 7 just because of the length of it. Now this one, I'm not sure it's going to show here, but it has two patent dates here and a small, this is the small adjuster nut. The rest of the parts are the same. If we look on here, 2 patent dates is the frog rib enlarged and arched. So this is an earlier plane, a type 9 or a type 10. So let's take a look and see. The frog rib is going to be underneath the frog. So here we can see this rib is pretty big, right? It said, is it enlarged and arched? So yeah, it's fatter than this type 12. And it's got a little bit of an arch to it. I guess that's what they're talking about there. So that would mean this is, the answer to that is yes. So this is a type 10, 1907 to 1909. So desirable plane, nothing wrong with that. So I should point out, when I put this back together, the reason these features here and here are nice is when I put the frog back in place, it's located at the front and at the back. So it's going to go in the same spot every time I put this back together. It's pretty well located there. If we did not have that feature at the front, and if we did not have the adjusting screw in the back, you would take more futzing around to get the frog in the right spot. So that's why those are desirable features. Okay, here's my number 4. This was probably the first plane I ever bought. Once again, it's got the 3 patent dates, but this time it has the small adjuster nut, right, compared to the big one. So this would be a Type 11. This is one of the planes from school, and it's definitely newer, I can tell right away, because it's got this chrome-plated lever cap. So let's see if we can figure out what type it is. So there are no dates cast into the bed. So if there are no dates, then we have a lot more questions to answer here. So is there a raised ring cast into the bed as a receiver for the knob? So this is the knob. That's this raised ring here, right? On my Type 11 and 12, there is no raised ring there. So the answer to that is yes. So we're up here somewhere in this range. Is the bed painted blue? No, it's not. Do the toe and heel have a raised rib in the casting? And that is here. So you can see there's this raised portion here, and then at the back there's a raised part there. So raised rib in the casting, the answer is yes. So now we're coming down to here. Is Stanley printed vertically on the lateral adjustment lever? So we need to take this off to see that. And I'm not sure that shows up, but yeah, it says Stanley there, and the letters read with this up. Sometimes it would read sideways, but so the answer to that is yes. Printed vertically in lateral adjustment lever, yes. So this is a Type 19 from 1948 to 1961. Fairly wide range there. The other things we can see here, so this has been plated. This screw is plated. These materials, although this actually looks like it might be rosewood. The handle certainly is not rosewood. Like I said, the lever cap is plated. Notice it's got this kidney-shaped opening for the screw. That's not good or bad. It just distinguishes differently. A couple other distinctions here. This rounding here and here, that came much later. Notice here's one of the lever caps that is basically the same thickness, almost down to the end, and then it tapers much more abruptly. Not a functional issue, but a difference. So Type 19, relatively new. So here's another number 7 from school, and it looks to be a little different than the other ones. There's no patent dates down here. And notice it does not have the raised rib at the end here, but it does have a raised rib for the knob. So let's take a look here. So the answer here was 0 patent dates. Yes, there's a raised ring. The bed is not blue. The toe and heel have a raised rib in the casting. The answer is no there. So this is a Type 15, 1931, 1932. So right the midst of the Depression there. So this is still a very nice plane. One thing that's nice, and once again, an aesthetic thing, it's got Stanley cast into the lever cap. That looks kind of cool. It's got the kidney-shaped opening there. The rest of it's the same. If we pull the blade out, once again, you can see here, this doesn't have that gradual taper there. Other than that, looks fine. Now, I'm not sure this will show up here. This blade says Stanley, and then there's a heart with an SW. That means sweetheart. So that was just something else they did to distinguish some of the tools. Some people find that valuable. I don't think it really means anything other than looks cool. Notice the frog here. A lot of the material has been relieved there. So down at the tip where it matters most is you've got the same amount of material. But if you're tuning up a plane like this makes it a little bit easier to get this surface flat, right? Because there's less material to remove. Now, if I take the frog off, we'll see that difference I mentioned earlier. So notice down here, we're missing that machined element. We still have the adjuster in the back here that of course interfaces with this plate. But now when I put this frog back in here, there's quite a bit of play here. So in order for me to get this in the right spot, what I do is I sight down this surface and see if I'm parallel there. And it's not like we're taking the frog off often. I mean, you may hardly ever take it off. So it's not that big a deal. It's more of a convenience thing to have those features down there. But like I said, it's just one of those things that was done as a cost-cutting measure. Still got the same adjuster nut. It's got a similar lateral adjuster. So the rest of the parts are the same, just missing some minor features. Okay, next up is this plane. So I always like taking a look at this type because it gives us an interesting history lesson. So there's no patent dates, and the bed, is there a raised ring cast into the bed as a receiver for the knob? Yeah, yes. The bed is not blue. Do toe and heel have a raised rib? Yes, you can see it there and there. Okay, the answer is yes. Is Stanley printed vertically on the lateral adjustment lever? So I'll take that off. And then it's a little hard to see here, but I'm reading Stanley. The letters are down this way, facing up that way. So the answer there is no. Does the depth adjustment nut have a diagonal knurling on it? No, diagonal knurling would be, if these ribs here were at an angle. So the answer is no there. And then does the plane have wartime features? Handle and knob stained red, yes. Or painted black, which no, but it's or. And here's the interesting thing, depth adjuster nut made of steel or hard rubber. So notice this looks like plastic. And this other piece here is, I don't know, maybe that's aluminum or something. So most of these, all the rest of them we've looked at have been brass, okay? And so they're asking us now, does it have wartime features? So the brass has gone away. And of course, in World War II, brass was in high demand for shell casings, things like that. So Stanley was still making planes then, but they couldn't use the materials that they'd used up to that point. So this is from the wartime. And if we look here, the answer is yes. So this is a Type 17 made between 1942 and 1945. So, yeah, interesting to see that. Note too that it does not have the adjuster screw down here and that plate that would be sitting here. That's not the end of the world. It just makes it a little harder to put the frog back in the same spot each time. And if you wanted to adjust the frog back and forth, you kind of have to eyeball it. You can't just say make a quarter turn with a screwdriver. This still certainly a serviceable plane. The functional parts are the same. You know, it's still got the good sole. The frog supports the blade well. The adjuster still is going to work just fine. It's the same lateral adjusting lever, but it just has some wartime features that distinguish it from some of the other ones. So as I'm putting this back together, I noticed, you know, the frog is in here really crooked, okay? And, you know, that wouldn't happen if the frog was located better. Now, one thing that's interesting, if I take it out, it actually does have the machined surfaces on the bed of the plane that locate the frog, but it's missing the corresponding parts on the frog itself. So we really don't have any locating features there. That's kind of an interesting mismatch of features. Last up is this plane. Now this is a little different animal. We'll see why in a minute. So notice this plane. It's got a plated lever cap. It's got what looks like oak handle and knob. It's got some extra ribbing here. The adjuster nut is plated, and I'm not sure it shows well here, but the this Y adjusting lever is stamped steel. It's plated, so it's two different pieces that are kind of slapped together there to create that Y. So I can tell from those features this is a much later plane, probably at least from the 60s, maybe 70s. And the other thing that's interesting about it is this. So this plane's made in England. Now, it does say Bailey on it, so, and it does say Stanley. Some of these that you'll see made in England, they're actually made by record. And if they're made by record, they're typically blue. And I don't think that type study would work for this particular plane. I'm pretty sure it's made after 1967. The other thing I should point out here is the sole. So I didn't mention that. Some of these have corrugated soles. Most of them do not. Some people find that to be a good thing. I don't know if it really makes a difference. I actually prefer that they don't have a corrugated sole because it makes it a little easier to adjust the plane when you're sighting down the sole of the plane to adjust it. All those extra lines on there just make things a little confusing. So I'm not a fan of the corrugated sole, but it's not going to hurt anything. If I found a good plane with a corrugated sole, that wouldn't eliminate it from consideration. Now, one last thing I want to mention. This of course, this is a Lie-Nielsen smoothing plane. And I'm only showing you this because I don't have an example of a Stanley that's this style. And this style with this flat top side of the base of the plane or the sole of the plane, Stanley made a plane like this with this characteristic. And this is their bedrock line. And when Lie-Nielsen made their planes, they picked up on that, and this is a bedrock style plane. So I want to show you the difference between bedrock and the traditional Stanley. This is considered desirable. If you find a Stanley bedrock, they're typically going to command a much higher price. And so far, it doesn't look that different. But if we look down inside here, notice we don't see screws now. We just see what looks like pins, okay? And on the back side here, there's some extra screws. So this is I'll call it a mechanism, a tightening device that is used to hold the frog down. So if I loosen these up, I have to back them off a bit. It's not just loosening them. This now comes off. So notice now, this is a very different way to attach the frog, okay? It's a much bigger, flatter, broader, more supportive surface, and that's why they called it bedrock, okay? Now, the very early Stanley bedrocks had the side of the plane that was still looked rounded. Sometime, I think in the teens, but I'm not sure, maybe around 1910, they switched to this flat top side, and as opposed to the rounded top, to make it more distinguishable which is a bedrock and which isn't. So the way this works, notice these pins have tapered holes in them, and these screws, the tips of these screws are pointed, and they interface with that tapered hole, and that's what pulls these pins down and tightens that up. So that's a nice thing if you happen to be out looking at old planes and you see one that seems to be priced at a much higher price than another one. It's possible that it's a bedrock. Another thing I want to show you is what you want to avoid in a bench plane. This is a inexpensive plane. I don't know what kind it is. It doesn't have a name on it. It just says Made in USA. You know, at a glance, it looks similar to the Stanley. I mean, the handle shape, the knob is similar, although this one's steel. It's got a Y adjusting lever. It's got a lateral adjusting lever. Now, notice this is this bent steel thing, which isn't quite as nice. It's got, I'm not sure what the material is on the handle and knob, but it's not rosewood like on this plane. But it's the frog that really makes or breaks a plane, or distinguishes between a good plane and a plane that's essentially a paperweight. So we'll take this apart. Now, a couple tip-offs right off the bat. Note that this surface is not machined, it's painted. All right, so that right off the bat, that tells me that the blade is not supported that well. The other big tip-off here has to do with how the frog is attached. So if I look down inside here, the frog's only sitting about 1/4 of an inch off of the base here. And that's always a bad sign. So if we take the frog off, we'll see what the issue is here. So remember, it's important that the blade is supported well, as close to the tip as possible. And if we take this off, we'll see that the frog is sitting here and here. Once again, a painted surface as opposed to a machined surface. But here's the kiss of death. The frog doesn't sit down here. It's only supported back here. You can see there's no machined flat there. That's painted. It's at an angle. And if I look here, once again, a painted surface where it does sit, but up here, there's no real surface, even a flat surface for it to hit. So what happens here, the frog is actually cantilevered out here. So it's only supported here. And so what can happen if you are planing wood that's at all difficult with changing grain, this flexes a little bit. Now, it doesn't have to flex much, and what happens is, because it's not supported, as you take a pass, it'll actually bend a little bit, and then it can only bend so far, and it pops up, and it bends, and it pops up. And you can actually, without too much trouble, use this plane and create you can actually see the chatter marks on the edge of a piece of wood. So whenever I see a plane that looks like this, with this very short support, right, about 1/4 inch up, I'm not seeing about 1/2 inch or so material there. Some planes like this don't have this adjuster, but I really want to see that height there. Or you've probably got a plane that looks like this, and like I said, maybe it would be okay for rough work, but I typically wouldn't spend much, if any, time on fixing up this type of plane. So I hope that was helpful. If you're looking for an old plane, look for a Type 11 and Type 12. That's the sweet spot. 9 and 10 is also good, and up through about Type 15 just before the war. Any of those are going to work well.